So my name is Joe Wilkins. I'm one of the senior judges, and we have with us Michael and Christopher, and I think John will be joining us as well. And we are delighted and excited to be here with you. We know that you worked extremely hard with your presentations today. And so I just want to go through sort of the overview of what we're looking forward to. And so this is part of the competition. You are taking on a fictitious business identity and assigning a fictitious business identity to us as judges. And I think you decided that we are the board members of the Community Research Center, board members. So please make sure that everyone knows who you are and before you begin, so we know your role. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes musters on 3 accounts. Again, going back to the financial, ethical dimensions and the legal dimensions of the problem. You will be uninterrupted, so we won't ask any questions until after your 25 minutes has concluded. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes still in character, still identified as board members, asking you questions, and your response will be as presenters as well. And once we get done that period of time, we'll be able to change our character and just be, take our ties off, relax, and then, share a bit of coaching and mentorship and any other feedback we can provide to help this journey. And so if there are no questions, then we'll get started.
Hello, thank you so much for having us here today. We are the Southern Postsecondary Research Board. And during this presentation, we will talk to you, the Community College Research Center, about your research practices, the ways that you are and are not being equitable, the ways that you are and are not upholding the law, and the ways that you are and are not being sustainable in your practices. So during this presentation, we will cover the legal issues, the financial issues, the ethical issues, and the sustainability issues. So who are we? Why are we here? We are an education board that oversees 20 states in their educational research practices. We want to ensure the utmost rigor, as well as you do, to ensure that our students are receiving the most optimal education possible for our students. So we are here to review the research that you have conducted, as well as the policies and practices that you currently have in place. So during this presentation, I will walk you through all of our introductory remarks, as well as cover any legal concerns that you should be cognizant of. And then Jonathan will walk us through the financial and ethical components of this presentation. And finally, Allie will conclude by talking about the sustainability components and then provide some general concluding remarks. Now, before I begin and explain your mission statement, I want to make a couple of things very, very clear. We will be referring to our students as students in developmental education. Likely you've heard of these students as remedial students, at-risk students, underprepared students. All of those pieces of terminology are deficit language, and we're not going to use them. We will be referring to our students as students in developmental education courses. We also use an acronym, and this helps make things a little bit more easy for everyone to understand. So the acronym for developmental education will be DE. And the acronym that we will use to refer to you, the board, is the CCRC, the Community College Research Center. These acronyms are simply there for simplicity purposes. They aren't, there is no other built-in purpose, but we all want to make sure we're on the same page with our language, because language plays a big role in how our actions are enacted. So to begin, let me remind you, the CCRC, of your mission statement. You say that you're dedicated to community colleges because they provide critical access to post-secondary education. And community colleges are uniquely positioned to promote equity and social mobility in the US. Your mission is to conduct research that helps institutions strengthen opportunities and improve outcomes for students, particularly those underserved populations. And even here in this mission statement, we see deficit language in describing our students, underserved populations. We want to avoid deficit language. We want to use person-first language. But anyways, the values that you are exemplifying in this mission statement are rigorous research, actionable knowledge, collaboration, and equity. After evaluation of your policies and practices, we have found that you have failed on all 4 accounts. You are not doing rigorous research. You are not having actionable knowledge. You are not engaging in collaboration, and you are not putting forth equitable policy practices. And this is really problematic for our students. Our solution that we will put forth during this presentation is for you to amp up your collaboration practices. There are two entities that are heavily invested in DE, developmental education research, which are the Charles Dana Center and the National Center of Developmental Education. Now, just as a reminder, you only began thinking and talking and writing about developmental education in 2004. That's 17 years ago. And even when you were talking about it then, you were talking about it differently. So this collaboration is going to help you understand developmental education. It'll help you build your research practices so that you can promote rigorous research. It'll also help generate equitable practices that'll carry past the education systems. And this is the solution that we are going to be putting forth throughout this presentation. So when thinking about the legal things and the legal issues, colleges are incredibly important. If we're looking currently at the Biden administration, we are talking quite extensively about the amount of money students are taking out for college tuition. We are talking about student loan forgiveness. So the amount of money that students are spending on these classes is important, and this is not going unnoticed. And so all of our legal systems are focusing in on this. And so this is your area. So we should be really mindful. You should be really mindful of a few things. The first one is you want to avoid the appearance of impropriety. You have committed to doing rigorous research. However, when evaluating the research practices and all of the publications that you are putting forth, 80% of the references that you are using are from within the CCRC. You are not citing elsewhere. You are not citing outside. You are self-citing, and you are self-citing in white papers. You are not publishing. You are not engaging in peer review. And so this continuous cycle is giving off the appearance of impropriety. The research may have good practices, but it is not undergoing peer review. Additionally, you are receiving government funds. Jonathan will go into this in more detail. However, you are receiving copious amounts of government funding for rigorous research. However, you are not practicing rigorous research. You are not engaging in peer review. You are not keeping students at the forefront of your thoughts when you are doing this research. And this is misuse of government funds. Specifically, this is considered fraud in several realms. And so we want to be very mindful of these actions. Now, just to clarify, as of right now, you are not in legal turmoil. You are not doing anything that is considered illegal. However, under further investigation, these types of issues could become a problem. One reason that this could become a problem is because when states are making policies based on your non-peer reviewed research methods, there could be legal issues. And just for example, there are currently 43 states using a co-requisite model, which Jonathan will talk about further in more detail in this presentation. However, this model has been influenced and grounded in non-peer review research. And so we think this is a potential problem that you need to keep in mind. There are some court cases to consider. These cases that you are looking at right now are both from 2021. In fact, they're actually from last month. Both of these were filed within March. And these cases are very similar in that the students, Jones and several students at Oregon State and the University of Oregon, are suing their institutions because they do not feel as though they received the education in which they paid for. So let me explain. Students during the pandemic used and engaged in remote learning, which was a different platform, a different model than what they were accustomed to. And as a result, students did not feel that they got the education they paid for. Now, this could be detrimental for you if students were to, for example, say the co-requisite model is problematic and this is the model that you are funding. Students could turn around and say, wow, this is really problematic. I didn't receive the education that I agreed to. I didn't receive the education that I paid for, and this is not fair. And so this is a potential legal concern for you. Now, just to give you some scope as to how big this is, there have been over 200 cases filed in the last month of students suing their institutions because they did not receive the education that they paid for. One other very important piece of mind, or thing to keep in mind, excuse me, is in Illinois, the state senator and the task force produced a 62-page document that goes into detail discussing the problems about your research and how it's impacting their states and their students negatively. So this is a real issue. This, if it breaks in other states like this, could be detrimental to you. So this is important. We need to evaluate your research practices, and we need to make some changes to them very quickly. But while doing this, we need to keep in mind our students. Jonathan. So our goal is to ensure that students are receiving an education, not only an education, but an education that is suitable for them, an education they are paying copious amounts of money for, that they need in order to do the work they want to do. Students are the intended beneficiaries of the system. And so when we think about the common good, we need to think about what model is going to work best for our students. Now, mind you, the majority of our students are unique. The majority of our students are not the norm. They are non-traditional students. They are students who have fallen into these minority categories. And so a one approach fits all is not appropriate. That is not serving the common good. And so we want to be very mindful of the practices we're putting forth and the legal implications of those practices. But to talk about this a little bit further and to focus in on the financial components and the ethical components, Jonathan will be speaking with you.
All right, thank you, Shanice. Now, some things to consider with the financial aspect of this. Here's your fiscal snapshot from the 2018-2019 fiscal year. Note that 18% thereabouts for your revenue by source comes from the federal government. And you also say that your expenditures by research area, that about 28% of your expenditures go towards research and developmental education. So just as a reminder, the field of developmental education is focused on research, policy, and practice, focusing on student success at the college level. And it's meant to support students who are not yet college ready when they're admitted to college. However, one issue that we immediately found is you're misrepresenting how much of your money actually is going to developmental education research. It's actually 85%, not 28%, because of course, high school to college transitions, those could be summer bridge programs, things like that, that falls under developmental education. Advising and student supports falls under developmental education, as well as guided pathways and different transfer models. That is all under the umbrella of developmental education. So not only does this give you the potential for an accusation of misuse of funds, but it also highlights how little you actually know about the field of developmental education, despite representing yourselves as an expert research institution that does research into developmental education. Now, just to look at the grants that you've been given in the past couple of years since you've been looking at developmental education research, since about 2004, you've gotten $24.4 million from the U.S. Department of Education to conduct developmental education research. But notice all of your principal investigators are from the CCRC, which of course would make sense. But none of your co-PIs listed on any of your grants, your co-principal investigators, are within the field of Dev Ed. So not only did you not start research into the field of Dev Ed until about 2004, but you didn't even enter your history of research into the field of Dev Ed with people who are in the field of Dev Ed or researching into the field of Dev Ed. And also from the National Science Foundation, you've gotten about $6 million. Again, no developmental education researchers or developmental educators as any of your co-principal investigators on these grants for research. And this absolutely does not allow you to serve the common good regarding developmental education students at all. How could it be possible for you to conduct rigorous research on behalf of developmental education students without, one, knowing anything about the field as shown by your fiscal reports, and two, without the support from anyone within the field of developmental education? Now, back to our solution that Shanice mentioned. We suggest partnering with the Charles A. Dana Center They've been conducting research for decades, actually between the Charles A. Dana Center and the National Center for Developmental Education. They've got about 70 years of experience of researching in the field. The Charles A. Dana Center has extremely rigorous peer review standards. They are a developmental math research leader, which developmental math is where the highest percentage of developmental students are. They also have extensive grant funding for research, so there are no potential financial or legal implications with partnering with them because they already get quite a lot of money from the Department of Education to do research. And they've had this funding for decades and decades and have not been at risk at losing it. They're also a past funder of you at the CCRC, which is good because that means it would be easy to strike up this partnership to have the Dana Center or their representatives as a co-investigator with your research grants. And for the National Center for Developmental Education, again, rigorous peer review standards. They host multiple journals for the field, multiple webinars, conferences. They do lots of professional development for the field and institutions. They're a big name in the field of developmental education, and they have been hailed for their rigor for many, many, many years. They also have the nation's most extensive resource library for the field of developmental education. So as I've shown with your fiscal reports, it's already clear that you have, at best, a misunderstanding of what the field of developmental education is. And partnering with the National Center would be a way of avoiding those types of confusions and making it look like you're doing your due diligence to actually explore the field in the way that it ought to be. And of course, they're faculty led for the most part with their leaders at the center and their researchers, which means these are people that can help you conduct research who deal with that student population on a daily basis. So they'll actually have an accurate representation of the expectations for developmental students and their demographics and where they come from. Now, for the ethical portion, Shanice briefly mentioned CoRec at the beginning. There's a lot of research that you have been conducting into the field of developmental education, but one thing we wanted to focus on, just as an example, is the research you presented on the co-requisite model of instruction. So essentially what that is a student comes into college who's not been deemed college ready, say by their SAT scores or high school grade point average. And they need help before moving into those college level courses. So they might take a developmental skills math course before they take college algebra, for example, right? But for the CoRec model that you push, they actually are in their developmental math course and college algebra at the same time. You sort of push that as an accelerated model that's supposed to help students advance more quickly. However, your values aren't being met when doing this research, specifically into the CoRec model for various reasons. For your rigorous research, like Shanice mentioned before, you're citing white papers and working papers a lot in your published articles. That's what we call gray literature, according to the APA style guidebook for citations. It's not peer reviewed. And again, you've shown a lack of understanding of the field by your fiscal reporting and by something I'll show you on this next slide. Actionable knowledge. It's honestly pretty irresponsible to push non-peer reviewed research as something that is actionable knowledge, something that institutions should be making policies off of. That's certainly unethical, and also it doesn't fall in line with your values. Equity, I'll talk about the demographic of students not being considered a bit more on another slide. And for collaboration, again, you've not been collaborating with anyone within the field of DE, despite being a relatively new researcher in that field. So for rigorous research and collaboration, you've not conducted any longitudinal data for the co-requisite model. Essentially, what you've done is said, here's a group of students, they've passed their first college level math course, and now we're calling it a success. which in fact, the way that education research works is they're looking to see, did you persist all the way through college to a degree, right? So you're stopping short with your research based on the education research standards. You're also making causal claims that co-requisite support is actually the cause of increased student success, when causal claims just are very rarely made in any sort of rigorous research, right? Usually you might make a correlation claim, but you're actually making something much stronger. You're saying particularly a co-requisite support program in Tennessee is causing student success. That is your language. Again, no collaborations with DE researchers or faculties. I know it's maybe a bit annoying at this point that we keep bringing that up, but it's so important to have good research partners when you're trying to conduct rigorous research. Again, your definition of success doesn't fall in line with education research at all. You're also misrepresenting co-rec as a cheaper model of instruction. So when you had your initial research that you put out on co-requisite, you were basing it off of an accelerated learning programs model from a community college in Baltimore, which was much cheaper for that community college. However, when you scale up that model, because they were only using it for 8 students, when you put it towards a more normalized population of developmental education students, the resources that you would have to put forth to give co-rec to all of them actually increases in structural cost by about 60%, according to some follow-up data that researchers in the field of developmental education, as well as the work group with the state of Illinois, who just published a report last year, it's becoming known that it's actually a much more expensive model despite being touted as something cheaper by y'all through your research. For actionable research, this is another area that shows that you might not actually know as much about developmental education as you put forth. Co-requisite models of instruction are not new at all. If you had partnered with researchers in the field of developmental education, you would know it was called mainstreaming in the 70s. It was called integrated reading and writing in the 90s, accelerated learning programs in the early 2000s, which was based on another rendition of mainstreaming from the 90s. These models have largely been done away with because they were either unsuccessful or expensive. Integrated reading and writing exists in some states now still, but it remains highly controversial. But the biggest thing about the actionable research is the Illinois Developmental Education Reform Task Force, which was created through a Senate bill. They put out a report last summer in 2020 that basically says, hey, don't use these reports on co-rec from the CCRC as actionable research because it is flawed in many ways. And we as a state need to pull back from using co-requisite because we've been misinformed. And they've mentioned issues with your sample size. They've mentioned issues with using your research as a causal claim. They also talked about how the student group from the original paper that y'all put out, they self-selected to be in that accelerated learning program, which means they knew what it was up front and they knew that they could probably handle being in the basic skill class and the college level class at the same time. And those 8 students elected to be there. Whereas you're touting co-requisite as something that will work for all students and will be this magic bullet for education to help student success, when students are being forced into it now because of policy and they're not able to elect based on what they think their own needs might be. And also you've changed the metric for what student success is, like I've said before, right? So it's not about passing a basic math course. It's about, do you persist to completion? And if Illinois is putting out this information, they work very closely with the state of Iowa to conduct research and policy together. And if Illinois is already saying, hey, let's scale this back and not base our policy on what you're putting out, Iowa's going to follow suit. And the more states that go into this, the more they're going to realize your practices with research have not been ethical, they've been misrepresentative, and this could cost you legally as well as financially if the federal government, which you're getting funds from, really catches wind of this, and it could impact your wallets as well as your reputation. Now, for equity, 78% of students in DE for community colleges, which again is the group that you say in your mission statement that you represent, 78% of them are Black, 75% are Hispanic, 76% are in that lowest income quartile, which is $34,000 or less, right, for income. Co-requisite courses are doubly expensive for these students because they have to pay for 2 courses, 2 instructors for 3 credit hours, like where everyone else would only be paying for 1. You're also misrepresenting the population here. So what ends up happening is, the population that you're initially talking about was white students from Baltimore, right? So this doesn't work for an equitable model. So again, our solution, partnering with Charles Dana Center, partnering with the National Center for Developmental Education. They both have experience in longitudinal data, which you don't. They have knowledge of the field and its students. They're both highly regarded for actionable knowledge. The state of Texas actually hired the National Center to audit their entire developmental education system in the state of Texas. That's huge, right? So that's going to help you collaborate with them to make you appear more equitable, more ethical, and have better standards.
Thank you, Shanice and Jonathan. The current practices of the CCRC are not contributing to equitable student success. When considering the UN 17 sustainability goals, one in particular stands out as not being met. Quality education, number 4 of the sustainability goals, which ensures inclusive and equitable quality education and promotes lifelong learning opportunities for all. This goal is not being reached by the current research and actionable knowledge described in your mission statement. There is a lack of consideration for students perceived outside of what has traditionally been thought of as a college student. Previous declined offers of collaboration with institutions conducting rigorous research with non-traditional students in mind had continued to aid in the lack of equity for all students. You can change slides. Quality of education is not being sustained by the lack of longitudinal studies, burdensome costs, and the co-rec model. There continues to be no longitudinal data referenced by the CCRC regarding degree obtainment. Do you want us to conclude here since you said time is up?
Yeah, can you conclude in the next 30 seconds?
Yeah, if you'll just go to the last slide, Jonathan. In short, the current CCRC practices are not in line with your core values: rigorous research, actionable knowledge, collaboration, and equity. You as the CCRC are having impactful changes on policies that are causing ethical and sustainable concerns for students, specifically non-traditional students. Although the CCRC's practices are not illegal, they could create legal issues in the future if students sue their post-secondary institutions because of the required enrollment in unsuccessful co-rec courses. The absence of peer-reviewed journal articles is the standard for rigorous research, can hinder needed knowledge in the research field and your ability to keep receiving government grants. Quality of education, the UN's 4th sustainability goal, is not being reached by the lack of peer-reviewed longitudinal studies, burdensome costs, and the co-rec model from CCRC's policy influence. The solution proposed to better align with your core values is to partner with the Dana Center and National Center for the Developmental Education. With their 70 years of combined experience conducting rigorous peer-reviewed research in the DE field, the collaboration will help the CCRC align with their values, creating actionable knowledge and equitable policy suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And sorry we had the time kind of got ahead of us, but it's important that we as a board have an opportunity to have Q&A with you and questions. That's also a very important part of the process. So I'll just start with some questions and then we'll ask our judges to to kind of pose some questions to kind of make sure we are clear and understanding of what you are presenting. So I wanted to start with first, can you go back to the slide that you highlighted that was the purpose, our mission statement? I just want to make sure that I clearly understand that, and have you one more time review that along with the clarity of what is the legal and ethical issues from a legal perspective, ethical perspective, relative to what you are detailing as our behaviors around our mission statement. So can you just kind of recap that one more time for us and just really understand, our legal implications for not fulfilling our mission, as well as the ethical issues with not fulfilling our mission? Thank you.
So I'll talk about the legal aspect, and then I'll pass it along to Jonathan. I think he'll weigh in on the ethical components. Like you said, this is your mission statement. You've made this pledge. Violating this mission statement is not illegal. However, it does cause others to view you as lacking propriety, and you put up an image that you just don't want to put up. You are not being transparent in your research practices. And in violating this mission statement, you are not being illegal. I want to be very, very explicitly clear in that. However, it could lead to legal issues down the line. But there are ethical considerations of violating this mission statement, and I think Jonathan can touch on those.
Yeah, and mostly, notice your mission is to conduct research that helps these institutions strengthen opportunities and improve outcomes for their students, particularly those from underserved populations. Now, remember, as far as strengthening opportunities goes, COREC has not been found to be that successful. Again, it was put out with misrepresented data from you. It's much more expensive than you've represented it to be. That's putting a lot of strain on community colleges, which are fairly underfunded to begin with. And when we're talking about improving outcomes for students, if it's not helping them pass their classes and they're having to spend more money on it, it's definitely not strengthening opportunities for them. And particularly those from underserved populations, which again, Shanice mentioned at the very beginning that we wanted to move away from detriment language and move towards more ethical language. That being part of your mission statement is not great, but also, I've talked about those populations and how they're from the lowest income quartile, making them pay extra money for these classes than other students would in their regular classes. So basically having them pay double the course fees for the same amount of credit hours, that's not equity, particularly when they are students from this lowest income quartile. Also, something we didn't mention already is with that detriment language, you also refer to these students as remedial students in a lot of your research, which again is that detrimental language, is not equitable at all. But another thing for the legal implications, particularly with this task force here that was formed in the state of Illinois by that Senate Joint Resolution 41, they are explicitly blaming you for them putting the co-requisite model into place, into state policy, and not seeing the results that they were supposed to see, and it being more expensive than it was supposed to be, and not seeing the students' successes that they were supposed to see. And if the state of Illinois it makes a decision to take legal action, they're already accusing you of these things in a public forum, based on these bills and things that they're doing. So by not falling in line with your mission statement to promote equity, social mobility, and conduct good research that can strengthen institutions, if that's not what you're doing, that's where those legal implications could be as well. And we're seeing that right now coming up in this last year, because one thing that you learn from doing policy research for education, it's Once one state starts doing something else, everybody else is going to follow. That's how the co-rec model that you pushed got so widespread now. Texas, Illinois, Tennessee, those states started using it pretty widely. And then all the neighboring states said, wow, they're doing something cool and interesting that they say is really good. And this, big research center backs it. So let's do that too, right? So once that domino effect starts going, everyone falls in line. So you need to get ahead of this now before more states take notice of what Illinois has put out specifically. So yeah,
Okay.
that's why the mission statement's important.
Okay, great. Thank you for that response. So Michael, Christopher, John, are you with us? Thoughts,
Yes, and I have a question when it's my turn.
Go ahead.
Did we do anything right? Because it sounds like we did a lot of wrong stuff.
So that's part of the concern. We think the mission statement that you've invested in is a great mission statement, and we do applaud you for that. We think holding equitable practices at the forefront and at the top, that's important. You're not doing that, but you're saying you want to. And so we think your values are good. You're not meeting those values, but they're good values. And you are doing research, you are publishing white papers. And so we see you as being invested in these students, just not in the most appropriate and most equitable ways. And so we applaud you for being interested in students. We applaud you for providing the mission statement that you provide. However, there's a lot going on here that needs to be addressed and needs to be fixed in order to make sure that our students are being taken care of in the way that they need to be taken care of. And
on top of that as well, look, it's very clear that y'all spend a lot of time writing grant proposals, which I don't know if you've ever had to do one before. They take months and months and sometimes a year at a time. That shows a heavy investment in developmental education students because those time constraints are just enormous, right? You've also done great at networking. Just, tons of funders here for your organization. And some of them, like the Lumina Foundation, are actually, pretty big. They do quite a lot of research themselves, and they do a lot of policy changes around the country as well. So we're talking about how far reaching your suggestions are, how great you are at networking, how great you are at bringing in funds for research. Those are phenomenal things. We just need to make sure that the research you're conducting is rigorous enough to warrant having those networks and that amount of money towards this research, and warrant having states and their policymakers trust you. So that's also something great that y'all have done.
Thank y'all.
I have a two-parter, and not surprisingly, they're both on the law. They deal with the two lawsuits against the universities. Number one, they haven't been resolved yet, so it's possible that the judge throws it out and sanctions the students for bringing a bad faith lawsuit, or it's possible it goes to a jury trial and the jury laughs them out of court, or it's possible the students win at a jury trial, but the appellate court says this is all bogus. So why should I be worried about it now before I know it's coming? And then let me ask the second one before I forget, because my memory's shorter than I'd like. The lawsuits are because the universities changed the way they do their education. You're telling me we should change the way we do our education. Aren't you telling me to do something that those students have sued their old schools for? So whichever order you want to talk about them.
Yeah. Those are both great questions.
Shanice, if you would like to take the first part, I'll take the second one.
Absolutely. Okay. So can you restate your first question? I was so excited to answer the second one.
Sure. We don't know the outcome. So a judge could throw it out pre-trial, a jury could throw it out during trial,
absolutely.
Or an appellate court could throw it out after verdict. So why should I worry? Isn't it too early for me to take that into account?
Not at all. So the reason that I've highlighted these cases and that we highlighted these cases during our presentation is because we want you to be aware of the trends that are happening within the legal system, but also the impact is pretty great, right? So as of right now, there are over 200 cases that have been filed and have been brought up. We see this as a trend, and so students seem to be trending in this way. So we want you to be mindful of possibility. So even if nothing comes to fruition, this has to be on the back burner of your mind so that you can be prepared and act accordingly. Because you brought us in here to tell you any legal concerns and considerations you may have. This is a trend. No, these cases have not been heard. Yes, you are completely correct that they all might be thrown out and laughed at. However, which I'm not suggesting you say that, but that's a possibility. However, this is something you need to keep in mind and be mindful of and track so that you can make sure that the CCRC is able to respond appropriately in the event that they need to.
Yeah, as I go to my slide for the second response, all it does take is for one case to be accepted, and then there's more force to that trend. But when we talk about that second part, yes, you're right. We are asking a change to be made, and the students are unhappy that a change was made. However, this traditional pathway was the norm and had been the norm for a while. Things didn't change until you suggested co-rec should make a comeback. So actually, when we're talking about a change that students won't like and won't be beneficial to them that they might sue for, you're actually the change. The going back to traditional models isn't the initial change. The initial change that is causing problems is the going to co-rec. So we're actually suggesting going back to the status quo, right? Which is what the students who are suing in the state of Oregon want. They want that status quo to come back. Shanice, you said you're excited about the second part, so I'm sorry I stepped over you, but did you have anything else
I'm
to
glad you
add?
answered it. You answered it just how I would have.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? Okay, I wanted to go back to the actual SDG number 4 under quality education. I noticed that that's what you started to highlight, that sustainable development goal in terms of, yeah, that's the one there, in terms of ensuring an inclusive and equitable quality education. And you clearly, your title of this presentation is around a critical evaluation of us. And so can you share a bit more as to why this particular goal, number 4, was selected? It's pretty obvious, but why is it so important?
Yeah, of course, I'll take this one. So this goal is important, right? Because what the CCRC is doing is they're saying that they want to help all students. Well, we're clearly not seeing all students being helped. Maybe all students that match this really specific characteristic that they're setting out as a college student. So we picked this one as our main one because we're looking to be inclusive to all students, right? Not students that just meet this kind of traditional background, but the students that are considered outliers typically. We want to expand that, bring them in, and with that, it brings this equitable education, and we need that. That peer research, peer-reviewed research is the standard for good research, and that's just not happening. And we're not getting the longitudinal studies from that, which is looking at students over their whole course time, their whole time in college. So we're just seeing this little snippet of their education. So how can we promote these lifelong learning opportunities if this lifelong journey is just being looked at from a 16-week kind of semester? So yeah, for all the reasons, this increased cost for students, the lack of research actually addressing all students, just contributes to not meeting this quality education that CCRC keeps promoting that they do. And we want to help you guys meet those goals, right? We want to help the students.
And on top of that as well, you know, when we're talking about equitable quality education, the students that developmental education targets already are coming from inequitable education, right? If they had an equitable education, they'd probably be college ready. once they got out of high school, right? So there's already an inequity in education happening when they get to the university or the community college. And so developmental education is charged with creating a more equitable education opportunity and getting them ready to go on to get a degree to, become lifelong learners and become people with careers and jobs and things like that. So that's just the very mission of developmental education, which you're researching within, is the sustainability goal. And plus, this sustainability goal falls in line with your mission statement. Your mission statement is to, create opportunities for what you describe as underserved populations of students, which, you're already describing the people that you want to help as those who are experiencing inequity in education, right? So that's another reason why we picked the sustainability goal.
Okay, great. Any additional follow-up questions from any of our other judges?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so at this point, we're going to conclude the presentation and Q&A, and we want to thank you and give you a hand for presenting this information to us. And I think at this point, we'll go to, some feedback, coaching, some guidance, if you will, for your next round, perhaps. And so I'll just start with just a bit of a perspective around the spirit of the presentation. I think you heard it, and I think one of the questions was, did we do anything right? I'll just pull that up because, when you're talking to a board, you do want to find a little bit of a ramp towards some goodwill before you jump into the critical aspects of what's being said to a board. And so there's got to be something worthwhile in the work that we do that you could use as a platform to kind of build confidence, and so that we could be more open towards your suggestions, if you will. And so I think that you were very strong and very critical, and that's probably really what's needed for action. But I think it's kind of always having the I always call it that sandwich. You got to wrap the good and then put that in the middle, and then make sure it's heard there. So I would just say that was just the overall feeling. But your presentation was, in feedback and critical advice was sharp, and it was crisp. So I thank you for that. Again, a very difficult subject of equity in education. It's you know it so well. You can hear it passionately in terms of what your research showed, and no doubt that this is a long-term structural issue that's been the case for a long time. So it takes quite a bit of effort to make a change in this direction. So I would just say, try and in your next presentation, try and add a little bit of salt and sugar and spice, and then bring in your audience so that they can be more open towards your comments. Timing was challenged, so that's important. Remember, a board only has so much time, and we usually can't listen to a presentation more than 10 minutes, so you get 25 minutes, and then we need to be engaged with you in Q&A, and I think that's one of the most valuable parts of the conversation. So I'll pause there, and then we'll hear from our real judge, Dr. Judge Finkel, and also from Christopher.
Yeah, sorry about the legal questions, but that's what I do to lawyers. So, and I'll echo what Joe said about, I think you led a little too sharply. I think the way you answered the questions, and I loved the way you answered my questions. I really thought I was gonna flummox you, and I didn't. Those were really good answers. Channel that into the original presentation, and I think you'll be going really well. Just a couple of techniques. You may not realize it, but we believe you're at legal risk in the following areas. Because I think the way you put it was, you committed fraud. Now, I'm not saying you face legal consequences, but I'm saying you committed fraud. If you said, you know what, you're at legal risk for somebody saying you committed fraud, but we can help you limit that risk. And I think that's a way that you can work on it. Or, you know, it's clear to us that your heart is in the right place and your goals are excellent. We can help you reach those goals better and more effectively and shield you from some criticism that maybe your current techniques are subjecting you to. Those are the techniques I think that I would use in order to do that. Or if you do want to give some more sharper criticism, you might say, you know, we talked about this. We're going to give you some sharp criticism right now, and we're just going to say it very bluntly. You know, we don't mean to, but it's the only way we can really get the point across in the time we have. So give them an idea of what's coming. And then a little better job on timing, because we didn't get to hear much from Allie. And, you know, I want to hear from the entire team. But I liked your enthusiasm and your energy. My wife was a special ed teacher with a master's in ed psych from Loyola Marymount and her bachelor's from Loyola Marymount. And so when you started slamming the use of mainstreaming, believe me, you had me on that one. I loved it. But I enjoyed it, and thank you for letting me listen to what you guys had to say.
I've got nothing serious to add. I liked everything Michael said and Joe said. I'm a lawyer too, so the legal stuff is very interesting. And it seems like you had a good grasp on all the legal concepts. Michael said, well, I don't know exactly what he said, but it sounded like a suggestion to kiss up a little bit to your audience in the beginning and then show them the error of their ways. That's always helpful in court and in business. I think you start off with a cookie and then you give them the bad food.
The liver.
Exactly. But I was very impressed. You guys did great. Everybody was articulate and intelligent, and it was good.
Yep.
Am I able to pose a question or in response to what Michael had said?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
So the things we're talking about are educational equity, and obviously that's very near and dear to all of our hearts. And I'm concerned about presenting it in a softer way only because I don't want to take away from the magnitude of the situation. It's not okay that we have structural problems. It's not okay that structural racism, structural sexism are implemented and are in our education system. It's not equitable. So how do we maintain and sustain the magnitude of the situation and the seriousness and the passion while softening the blow?
Well, you can explain that that's, you know, this is what you want. This is in your mission statement, and these are your goals. And the thing is, people are getting sued right, left, and center for not doing these types of things. And with some of your practices, you are at risk. You're in that at-risk group, and it's clear you don't want to be. And we have a way that you won't. So you're crediting them for having their heart in the right place. And then you're just saying, you know, it's just a matter of execution, which we can help you with. So that's how I would soften it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
And
Go ahead.
in response to your question, Shanice, I don't think a softer approach is needed. I just think there needs to be some preliminary softness, and then bing, bang, boom, you can beat the crap out of us for doing bad and not being equitable. But, you know, just start off with a little kiss and then start punching. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, and it's about you know, building a bit of rapport, you know, just making that connection, and that could just be highlighting the history of the organization and our role and the importance of our role. So it's there, but it's so important to make that connection. And then the other thought is to find a creative way to humanize the problem. You know, pick an identity or a person or a group of people and describe the real output or outcome of it all in a humanized way, and that could help be more acceptable to but though in no way are we saying, you know, you got to be you got solid evidence, solid material and it needs to be, we, you know, board members need to hear nothing but the truth and the truth. So it's important. So
People love stories.
yes.
If there's a way you can find any kind of a personal story, even if it's something from your own past, where one of these one of these concepts help, anything that humanizes it and that personalizes it, you know, I mean, you can't lie, but, my father came up through this type of a situation and he never reached his full potential. We don't want our children to be like my father. I mean, totally made up example, but if you have a personal touch, and that's what people do with juries, they argue, they try and get the jury to, the more the jury personalizes and identifies with the defendant, the less likely they are to convict. The more they identify with the victim, the more likely they are to convict, so, but just anything that you can think of, even if it's a case study you've done, or, in the real world, you would try and find a student who came from that very organization who happened to have had the benefit of what you're trying to get them to do more of. That's the best, but that's not realistic in this.
Thank you for that.
No, thank you.
And I had a question as well about the timing aspect. How far do we go over? Because you were aiming between 25 and 30, because in years past there was that 5 buffer minutes. Has that been done away with, or?
Yeah, I apologize for that. Yeah, it is. It's a sharp 25 minutes, maybe a few seconds, beyond that, but definitely not 30 minutes.
Okay.
So sorry if you didn't understand that. We should have been more clear up front with that. But that's really important, because when you're in presentations, you got the time, and if you go over that, it's always not a good thing. So, but yeah. So
okay.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, I think that, again, we are so thankful and grateful. We learned a tremendous amount from you. Continue being passionate about this topic and subject, and we wish you the best in your next round.